Turning to Egypt, Egypt is bracing for fallout as Israel prepares a major push into Gaza City. According to Qatari media, Cairo has reinforced troops along its eastern border, fearing that as many as 1 million Palestinians could be displaced southward and that Israel may try to push them even further toward Egypt's Rafah crossing. Now, officials say that the move is meant to send a clear message. Egypt will not accept a mass influx of refugees, nor a humanitarian solution at the expense of its own territory and security. Well, to break this down, I'd like to turn to our senior Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. You know, Ariel, first of all, what are you hearing from Egyptian officials and regional media about Cairo's red lines when it comes to potential refugee push across the border, especially amidst what we saw was a very, very strong push by Egyptian mediators to get Hamas to agree to the deal that is now on the table?
Yeah, Egypt has set 2 red lines. One, no deportation of Palestinians, be it voluntary or not, and no pushing them to the Egyptian border. They fear this is the latter. This is going to force roughly 1 million Gazans to the border. That's why, since the start of the war, we've seen the Egyptian side bolster the border with Rafah along the Philadelphia corridor. It's perhaps one of the best guarded borders in the world out of fear of this exact scenario. In Cairo, they're describing this as a direct threat to Egypt's national security. They don't want to be put in a situation where there's masses of Gazans running to the border and they'll have to shoot at them. They want to avoid that situation, but don't be confused. If this happens, they will shoot at them. They will not take Gazans. And this is part of the tragedy of this war, that Egypt has closed its border, has not allowed Gazans to flee the devastation that is ongoing there. I mean, just imagine how different this whole situation would have been if just on the other side of the border, the Egyptian authorities would have allowed mass camp cities. This would be without Hamas. All the civilians would get everything they needed. All their needs, their basic needs, would be provided for, and they wouldn't be in harm's way. But Egypt prevented that, which also constrained Israel, putting Israel in this situation of playing with the aid, of going from this area to that area. This Egyptian position also put military constraints on Israel. Not enough is being talked about this, but this is the Egyptian position, and they're not moving from it one bit.
Right. Obviously, we talked about this last week. We saw 2 protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters, who were part of a Hamas campaign.
Protesters, yeah,
right. Essentially dragged into the UN mission, the Egyptian UN mission in New York, and beat up, assaulted. We're beginning to see more people come up and speak out against Egypt. But, you know, what is the issue? Break this down for our viewers. Why is Egypt so against allowing these Palestinian civilians to make their way into Egyptian territory in the Sinai, with, you know, of course, the hope that they would be able to return back once this war ends?
Because it's the assumption and the end of your question is what undermines this whole thing. For the Egyptian public, any move to open the borders to allow Gazans to leave, even if this is for their own safety, that is seen as a deportation of Gazans. That is seen as a massive blow to the Palestinian cause, which unfortunately hurts first and foremost the Palestinians themselves. This is really a double-edged sword for the Palestinians, that they can't take them, and if anyone wants to take them, then they'll be seen as hurting them, so they won't take them. This is the absurdity of the current situation, but this is how the Arab Street views the Palestinian cause, and there's massive pressure against all Arab governments to refuse such a move. And unfortunately, the leadership is listening to this, when ultimately we know that if the borders were open and the Gazans had a way to leave safely for a temporary period of time, they would be out of harm's way.
You're hearing that from your Gazan sources, from Palestinian sources on the ground?
What? That if the border were open, they would leave? I mean, that's a fact. They wouldn't be targeted by Israeli jets, because Israeli jets aren't striking in the Sinai Peninsula.
Well, it's more of, I guess the question is more of whether or not, you know, Gazans are willing to leave their land for that temporary safety, given the fear that they may not be able to come back, because who knows what happens with the continuation of this war.
Look, for some Gazans, going from Rafah, from Khan Yunis, to the Egyptian side of Rafah, that is closer distance than Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia in the north. I mean, this is a tactical move to provide them safe passage and basically a real safe humanitarian zone that unfortunately does not exist even in the so-called humanitarian zone. Where was Mohammed Death, the military leader of Hamas? Where was he eliminated? He was eliminated in the Muasi, a protected humanitarian zone, because they take cover inside the civilian population in the most sensitive of sites. So such a move would spare the lives of so many Gazans, but this wasn't done mainly because of Egyptian refusal, or solely because of Egyptian refusal.